Great to see you, Marc.
Thanks.
I hope your summer's going well. I can't imagine what lawmakers are going through as they come back to town here, knowing that they're handcuffed. How do you get the floor back open?
I think that they're going to have a challenge getting the floor back open. I think they're making the right case by going to the president. He probably has as much leverage over Luna as anybody else. But I still think that you have such incredibly narrow margins right now, and any legislation they're passing, I think, is getting more and more difficult as you get closer to November because your margin in the Senate is pretty tight, too.
Yeah. Sure is.
Well, certainly so, and we'll get to that margin in the Senate in a moment, Marc. When we consider, though, that the president does seem to have a fixation on the very same thing Anna Paulina Luna does, which is the Save America Act, despite repeatedly being told by leadership that the votes are not there as it stands, he's not abandoning the effort. Is he going to be forced to at some point?
Well, I think that some of us who are more cynical think that the president, knowing what the prospects look like in the midterms, can say, look, I told you guys what would happen if you didn't pass the SAVE Act. And so there's a little bit of, I think, setting up for what is likely to be a political downer come November for those of us who are Republicans. But I think that the House strategy is to break the Save Up Act and basically move it as part of a Reconciliation 3.0 and to tie funding to states to actually implement the SAVE Act at a state-by-state basis. Again, I think the prospects of a Reconciliation 3.0 getting passed through both chambers at this point is pretty slim.
Does it become more difficult without Lindsey Graham at the helm of the Budget Committee? He seemed to be helping to steer this, at least for the upper chamber. We can talk about a lot of the other implications of his passing, but that seems to be an immediate one.
I think that losing Lindsey Graham is a big loss for Washington, for our national politics. I think he was uniquely talented in ways that he had friendships with John McCain, Joe Lieberman, Donald Trump. That's a unique trifecta, and I think it shows his flexibility and his nimbleness in this town. But honestly, Joe, I don't really know at this point. Again, the SAVE Act and others would need 60 votes in the Senate, so it's not like Lindsey Graham's vote was making a difference. And his talent was to basically be an emissary between the Senate and the White House. I don't think it's having that dramatic an impact on actual legislation between now and then. And people forget, between now and Election Day, I think we're down to 21 legislative days.
Wow.
That's it. Yeah. And so there's really not a lot of time to get NDAA, Reconciliation 3.0, or as you just mentioned, funding for the government that's due September 30th.
Well, what about funding for the Defense Department in particular? Because, of course, Lindsey Graham was a defense hawk.
Sure.
He was a vocal advocate for things like a $1.5 trillion defense budget.
He was a great advocate for the Defense Department, but also for Ukraine against Russian aggression and for Israel. But again, I think as long as the war is going on, it's going to be hard to earn Democrat votes on supplemental funding for Department of Defense. And so I think that those prospects are pretty bleak as well.
Well, even more extreme, I guess, in the analysis from our chief policy analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence, Nathan Dean says, from here on, it's nothing but CRs. In fact, that could be the case for the next 2+ years, Marc.
I think that it is likely to be CRs for quite some time, but I think even the September 30th could be more of a shutdown than a CR, because
despite
right now where they are is in very different spots, and I don't think there was a political consequence to Democrats shutting down the government last time. And I think for most American voters, the assumption is, look, you have the White House, the House, and the Senate. Yeah. They don't know that 60 vote threshold in the Senate or whatnot, so they're going to blame one party if they're shut down and say your party's in control. And I think there's a Democrat viewpoint that says we're not at loss here if there's a shutdown come September 30th. Wow.
So that just reinforces the midterm momentum being not on the side of the Republicans in your mind, essentially?
I think that the challenge for Republicans is always going to be a difficult cycle when your party is in power in the White House. It's even more difficult if your party's control the White House, House, and the Senate. Americans want divided government. It's what they prefer. And so it doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means that the hurdle is really high. I think you add to that the president's trade agenda and the fact that we've not basically really lowered prices significantly. I mean, we talk about inflation going down from 9% to 4%. Yeah, the rate of increase is less, but prices aren't less. It's still a 4% inflation rate. And I think for a lot of farmers in America, they're feeling that. They're feeling the higher fertilizer prices, and they don't have markets to export to because in retaliation to the president's war on trade, other countries have closed those markets. And so I think there's a lot of consternation in the heartland of America about the current trade policy, and that has been a reliably red Republican part of the country. And I think that you could see losses there that Republicans have not seen in many years.
Really something. Now that we're back to what appears to be a shooting war with Iran, not that it ever really stopped, but after a third night of pounding attacks that we saw last evening from the United States, the conversation about war powers is going to come back around. Does that gain more traction the further we get into primary season with lawmakers starting to feel a level of independence?
It probably gains more traction on the campaign trail.
Okay.
It probably gains a bigger campaign issue. I still don't think there's a jeopardy of them getting the necessary votes in both chambers to get that. And I still think it has not been challenged at the Supreme Court as to whether or not this is really what our founders designed, was for the legislative branch to have that authority.
Well, when we consider, though, the prospect of the war continuing, the president to this point, or at least until recently, expressed very little appetite for an outright resumption in hostilities. And then at the NATO summit, he suggests there's no point in negotiating with the Russians. He declared the MOU dead. He effectively said the ceasefire is over. And today he says we're reinforcing the blockade. It feels like this is only going one direction, and it's not the direction of resolution, Marc, or you'll correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I don't think you're wrong. I mean, I think that the J.D. Vance wing certainly wanted to try to strike some sort of appeasement toward Iran, but it doesn't appear that's had any progress. And I think for a lot of people, they look and say for 47 years, Iran has continued to break deals, and so why are you surprised? But there's also an enormous amount of mixed messaging that's come from the White House throughout this conflagration. And, it was only not just a couple weeks ago the president said it's a great deal and we're going to get it done, but he actually even said, he was allowing them the ability to repurchase weapons to defend themselves. And so there's been a
Didn't
lot
think
of different
ballistic missiles were problematic.
Goodness, there's been a lot of different messaging that's come out from what the White House position is on the MOU, much less the larger wars. But I think you're right. I think that as Iran has continued to poke the bear, the president's probably gotten at this point pretty tired of it.
I'd love your thoughts, Marc, short on South Carolina and what comes next. We've had a number of names on a pretty short list at this point. Lieutenant Governor Pamela Yvette seems to be at the top of it, not as a caretaker. That appears to be something that'll be reserved for Lindsey Graham's sister, Darlene. But Nancy Mace on Twitter with the Godfather tweet, "They keep pulling me back in." Ralph Norman, both fresh off primary runs and losses. Will this be a familiar name, or maybe one of these three?
I mean, neither of them made the runoff.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to see that changes that much in the last couple of months. I think the president's going to continue to be invested in what happens in South Carolina, and I think it's pretty well known his opposition to both of those two. One for supporting Nikki Haley, one because it's just because of who Nancy Mace is. Yeah, it's a lot. Well said. And so I don't see that the president's going to get behind either one of them. So I think that it's probably going to be a different candidate.
Well, and we'll see what kind of candidate does come forward and how much they reflect the kind of hawkish nature of Lindsey Graham, as we've already discussed. I just wonder with his exit, with Mitch McConnell, who of course says that he is going to be returning to the Senate, although it's not clear when his hospitalization will end. They represent a kind of wing of the Republican Party that J.D. Vance, who you just mentioned, for example, does not represent. And I wonder with their departures, if you see the party is going to be shifting much more in the direction of the isolationist wing rather than the kind of interventionist hawk.
I think it's a great question, Kaylee, and I think it's something that is yet to be seen. I think there's no doubt that the isolationist wing has been ascendant in the Republican Party, and as you say, the more hawkish wing, losing both McConnell and Lindsey Graham, will have significant losses there as far as what the national debate is. As far as Lindsey's successor, may not be as articulate as Lindsey, but certainly with all the military presence that South Carolina has, you would imagine that the successor will more or less support the same viewpoint. But as far as the rhetorical debate about where the party goes, I think it's pretty much up for grabs.
We've only got a minute left, even less than that. Can you imagine an IndyCar race downtown Washington, D.C.? The drivers are about to get out there with the president. You going to this?
Look, I think it'd be pretty fun, but at the same time, you guys know what August weather is in D.C.
Yeah, right.
I mean, how hot and muggy that's going to be.
After we survive 4th of July.
After 4th of July, it was pretty hot and muggy on the mall, too.